In this video, we'll be mastering in Cakewalk by Bandlab. Hi folks, I'm Mike and I hope you're well. So we all know the feeling. You've done the final mix of your song, but when you play it up against other commercial songs in your playlist, it just sounds kind of weak and lackluster. And that may well be because you haven't mastered your song. So in today's video, I'll be guiding you through 10 straightforward steps to master your song in Cakewalk by Bandlab. I'll be using a combination of the plugins which come with Cakewalk and also a few free ones which really do help with the process. So if that sounds like the kind of thing you're interested in, I do encourage you to watch all the 10 steps of the video to really get the most benefit from it. Now, if you do like this kind of content, all about home recording, DAWs, gear reviews, plugin reviews, that kind of thing, then do make sure you subscribe and ring the bell on YouTube so that you're notified about my future videos. Now let's get stuck into some mastering. So what is mastering? Well, mastering is the final step before you release your music to the world. It differs from mixing in that you're making changes to the overall sound rather than individual parts of the music. Crucially, it's also where you take care of the technical requirements for the different platforms you may be releasing to. So platforms such as streaming services like Spotify or MP3 or CD or perhaps video, even vinyl. They all have different technical requirements. Now, for some of you, when you release music, you may be expecting that it will be heard by millions or hundreds of thousands of people. And if that's you and you've got the budget, I highly recommend sending your track off to a mastering engineer to get it mastered. But for the rest of us mere mortals who don't have the budget or the time, then I recommend having a go at mastering. If you follow through the steps we're about to go through, I think you'll at least find a marked improvement over your final mix.
1.
Okay, so I've prepared for mastering by creating a stereo wave file of my final mixdown, and I've exported that from my mix project. Now, if you don't know how to export from a Cakewalk project to a stereo wave file, check out the video I made about that, and I'll put a link just up above here for that or down below in the description. I'm going to go ahead up to File and I'm going to import audio and then select the WAV file. Now, there's various reasons why I'm using a WAV file and not doing my mastering in the actual project itself, but I realized in a take I did before this that this video gets way too long if I go into depth why I do that. So ask me in the comments down below and I'll try and answer that if you're interested. So I'm going to start off just by tidying up the interface a little bit. I'm going to get rid of this side panel on the left here by collapsing it, and I'll go over and collapse the right panel as well, and I'll just expand so I can see what's going on in a little bit more detail here. So I'm going to start off by trimming the beginning of this WAV file so that I can start at the beginning. So I'll turn snap off, and then I'm just going to drag the edge of that across just before that I can see the music starts there. Okay, of course you'd want to check this out by listening. Now, the other thing you can do is actually zoom in a little bit closer here, and if you go to the top left hand corner, see this little triangle icon, if you can create just a little fade there. Now, that's helpful in that it just makes sure there's no pops and clicks at the beginning of your track there. So I'll drag that back over so that it all starts at 0. And then I'll scroll over to the end of my track where I'll just trim the actual end of the song. Now I'll just zoom out a little bit so I can see what's happening. Now this song ends on a final piano chord here, and it has a sort of a natural decay to it. And there's a feeling of a natural time when it will end and the next song will start. So what I like to do is just start from that final chord where that piano is played, and I'm going to play it and kind of feel where I think it should end and go into the next song. I'm going to say about there is a good spot. So I'll just trim the end of the track again, just going to the right hand side, dragging it across to that rough spot there. Now, when there is a sort of a decay with a final chord on a song like this, what I like to do is actually drag out a fade here. Again, I'm going to the top right and I'm just going to drag out a fade, and I go all the way back to where the final chord was played. I generally find that works in terms of making it sound reasonably natural in terms of its decay. Of course, you have to judge it by ear, but let's have a listen and see how we've gone there. Okay, that feels about natural to me, so I'll go with that. But of course, you have to adjust it to your own taste for your own particular song. Okay, so we have our track loaded up, and I'll just squash that back down there. And it's been trimmed. Now I'm going to create another audio track here. I've just right clicked in the space here, insert audio track, and I'm going to go up to file and import audio, and I'm going to import a reference track. Now I've got one prepared here. What is a reference track? Well, a reference track is another song which you feel is quite similar to your one. It's probably going to be a commercial song, and you'd want to feel that it's got similar sort of sonic properties, a sort of a sound that you would like to go for, and it's probably going to be a similar type of song. So my song, for example, is basically a piano ballad, but it's got a section in the middle where some drums and orchestra comes in, and my reference track is fairly similar to that as well. Now, I'm not going to tell you what this track is, and I'm not going to play it during this video because I'll get done for all kinds of copyright reasons. So you'll just have to pretend that we play it once in a while. I'll tell you when I would use it as a reference, but it's kind of at different points throughout the whole process of mastering. Now, one thing that's sort of fairly important to me is to compare similar sections. At the end of this reference track, you can see the very loudest section here. I want to be able to compare that to the loudest section of my song, which is way back in the middle here. So I'm just going to trim that reference track a little bit and then drag it across until its loudest section is lined up with my loudest section. That's just so when I'm A-Bing between them later, I don't have to keep adjusting the playhead and finding those different sections. And that's probably the most important parts for me to compare the actual loudest part of the song. So with that done, I think we're ready to bring up the console. So I'm just going to click on my console tab right at the bottom of the screen. Now, if you don't have your console tab, then just go up to view and click on console view there to bring up the console. Now I'm just going to squash down my tracks here a little bit. I don't need them to be too big because I just want to use them for navigation. And then I'm going to drag up my, oops, sorry, wrong one. I'm going to drag up my console view so that it goes all the way up to where my tracks are there. The next thing I'm going to do, just as a little bit of maintenance, is get rid of this metronome track here, which is there by default. So I'll right click on that, click delete bus. And the same for the preview bus there. I'll right click on that and click delete bus, and then I can just drag that divider over there so that my master bus is all the way over there. I'm not going to be creating lots of tracks here, guys, so this is nice to have this space here for plugins, etc. Now on the channel where my actual song is, which is the first channel here, I'm just going to expand the Pro channel by clicking on the little arrow there next to where it says Pro channel, and that opens that up there. I'll just drag that divider across, and I'm going to get rid of a few of the modules from the Pro channel which are there by default. So I'll right click on this compressor here, remove that module, and I'll go down and remove this tube module here. Same again, and I'm also going to remove this console emulator because it's not quite the one I want. So I'll remove the module there, and I'm just left with the EQ module there, which is one of the first ones we'll be using. I'm going to do the same over here on the master bus. I'm going to just click on the little triangle next to Pro channel, click on that, and that expands the Pro channel there, ready for me to use.
2.
So something really important to the process of mastering for me is metering. So I'm going to insert a metering plugin right at the end of the whole chain. I'm going to put it on the master bus, and I'm going to make sure that it's right at the end so that anything affecting the sound is coming before it. So I'll go to the Pro channel on the master bus here. I'll right click, and I'm going to click on insert module, and I'm going to go all the way down to where it says effects chain, and that will insert effects chain at the bottom there. I'm going to rename that there to analysis. Hopefully I can spell that right. Okay, and that just lets me know that everything in there is for analysis. Now I'm only going to be putting one plug in there today, but sometimes I use 2 or 3 different ones. I'll click on where it says effects and plus, and I'm going to insert a plugin which doesn't come with Cakewalk, but it's a free one called Span. It's by Voxengo, and of course I'll put a link in the description so you guys can get hold of this. There's really nothing similar to this in Cakewalk by default, so I very much recommend getting hold of this because we're going to be using it a lot through the process. And I'm going to start off by using it to level match our reference track with our actual track. Now, why would I do that? The reference track is bound to be louder, and which is going to make it automatically sort of sound better, because things which are louder tend to just sound better to us. So I don't want that. I want it to be sort of matched in loudness to our track so that we can hear what we're doing and what effect it's having and how that compares to the reference track. So I'm just going to quickly level match those two tracks. But I'm actually going to start off with the reference track being muted here. I'm going to go to my original track and just check where the levels are with that to begin with. So I'm just going to play it quickly in the loudest sort of part.
Ever felt so far away from you?
And I can see it's peaking at around about -6 dB here, which is just a little bit quiet for me. I'd rather have it much nearer -3, maybe a little bit above that. So I'm just going to use the gain control to adjust that.
Ever felt so far away from you?
Okay, so I've used the gain control on the actual channel to increase the volume there, and it's going up to about -3 there. Now I'm actually going to play it again, and I'm going to just take a look at where the average sort of volume is. So let's have a play.
Ever felt so far away from you?
So you can see it's averaging at around about -9. So let's just remember that -9 decibels is your average. And I'm going to try and match the reference track so that its average is around about that level. So I'm going to mute the original track. I'm going to unmute the reference track. Now I'm actually going to mute the master bus here so you can't hear the reference track, because as I say, I don't want to get in trouble for copyright issues. So we're going to do this visually, but I would actually recommend you do it both visually and with your ears as well. But we'll go ahead for demonstration purposes and do it visually now. So I'll play the song in that loudest section again. And you can see right away it's much louder. It's peaking at 0, of course, and it's averaging around about -3. So we will drag its gain down until we get it down to around about -9. So that's going to be at roughly the right kind of level. And if you were to check this now, I would take a guess that it's going to sound around about the same level of loudness. So that now makes that track actually useful for us to compare it to.
3.
So quite often with our mixes, we end up with a kind of low end build up, which we don't really want, and sometimes we can't even hear. So we're going to deal with that now. But you might ask me, well, why are we getting rid of things that we can't hear, Mike? Well, although we can't hear some of these very low end frequencies, the computer can, and it uses that information, and it will affect plugins which are further down the chain, especially perhaps compression plugins, even saturation plugins may kick in before we really want them to. So I like to get rid of them at the beginning here now. So I'm going to go over to the first channel here, and I'm going to double click on the graphic display area of the EQ. That brings up this big display, and I'm going to click on this HP button that stands for high pass. Now sometimes on other EQs they refer to this as a low cut. It's exactly the same thing, just different terminology. Now I'm going to change the slope on this so it's quite a lot more aggressive. I'll dial it all the way up to the most aggressive setting there, and I'm going to change the frequency to around about 20 to 25. We'll put it at 20 there, is fine. Now the relevance of that is that's right at the bottom end of human hearing. Anything below that, we really don't need it at all, so we can just get rid of it, and we can probably do without some of that, which is right at the bottom of where we can hear as well. Now what I would normally do is kind of actually listen to the song and bypass that setting which I've dialed in there and see if it's making any difference at all. If it's not making any difference, that's a good thing. We shouldn't really be able to hear a difference. So if you've put the frequency up a little bit higher, for example, and then when you A/B and you listen to the song, you can hear an actual difference as you bypass it, then you've got the frequency up too high. I would tend to put it down to a point where you just on that borderline of where you really can't really hear a difference.
4.
So Cakewalk has some really nice console emulators, and what these can do is add some really nice sort of analog warmth to your mix. Now they're very subtle, and I would say you don't have to add them at all. They're very optional. But if I was going to add one, I would add it in at this point, just after this initial high pass EQ. So I'm going to go over here to the first channel. I'm going to insert a module. I'm going to go down to the console emulator bus, not the console emulator channel, but the console emulator bus. So I'll click that there. Now you've got three different types of console emulation here, the S type, the N type, the A type. They're all sort of based upon some famous consoles which were in famous recording studios in the past. So I'm going to use the N type and I'm going to play my track and just sort of add the drive to taste. So I'll have a listen to it.
Ever felt so far away from you?
Okay, I like it around about there. I don't want to overthink this at all. Now, it's a very, very subtle effect. So if you're new to mixing and mastering and you're going, Mike, I can't hear any difference there at all, that's fine. It takes a while for your ears to get tuned into those kind of very real subtleties. Stick with it, keep listening. You'll begin to detect those tiny little things. So that's where I would add the console emulation. But as I say, it's very, very optional. Don't feel that you have to add it.
5.
So another very optional stage is to add some saturation. Now you don't have to add saturation, but if you do, I would add it in here. So I'm going to go across to the track channel again, to the Pro channel, and right click, insert module, and go down to the saturation knob. I really love these very, very simple controls. This is a nice little module for the Pro channel here. I'm going to play my song and gradually push this saturation knob up to a point where I think it sounds okay. And of course I want to avoid over distorting it as well, which you can easily do with this plugin. So let's have a listen on a sort of a loudish part of the song, or the loudest part of the song.
Ever felt so far away from you?
I'm just going to sort of play it and then bypass it and play it again, see what difference it's making.
Ever felt so far away from you?
Now I think it's fairly obviously adding a little bit of volume in there, but there's also a nice little bit of sort of almost grittiness in there, which I kind of like. So I'll keep that one in there, and that's where you would add it if you are going to add saturation.
6.
So next I'm going to add in a compressor, but I'm not going to be using one of the compressors which comes with Cakewalk. Instead I'm using a third-party one. It's absolutely free. It's by Tokyo Dawn Records. It's called Kotelnikov, and I just think we can achieve our task a little bit better with this particular compressor. So I'm going over to insert a module to my Pro channel, and I'm going to insert the effects chain one, and next to where it says effects down the bottom, I click on the plus button, go to insert audio effects, and then go to my Tokyo Dawn Labs folder and insert TDR Kotelnikov. Almost got it right. Now I love this compressor. I could make a whole video about it, but I'm not. I'm going to start off when I'm doing this compression, which I want to be very, very subtle, at looking at the actual ratio. So the ratio starts at 2:1 here, and that's the sort of kind of ballpark figure that I'd like to start off with, maybe even a bit lower. So I'll just drag it down just a little bit. We want some really subtle compression here, so the ratio can be very, very low. Next, I'm just going to adjust the threshold. I'm going to play the track and adjust the threshold so it's starting to do about sort of 3 decibels of reduction. Now that's not the amount I want finally, but it just enables me to hear what's going on a little bit more with the compressor while I'm adjusting it. So I'll play the track and adjust that.
Ever felt so far away from you?
Okay, and that's fine. And because I want this to be subtle, I'm just going to push up the knee control a little bit so it's got a nice soft knee. Now next I want to be looking at the attack time. Now with master bus compression, I think you've got to be careful with the attack time, because if you make it too short you can really kill off the sort of transients with your drums and things. And this song has some drums which come in this section. I particularly want the snare and the kick drum to be able to snap through nicely. So I'm just going to adjust my attack so that it isn't killing off those transients.
Ever felt so far away from you?
Okay, I could spend longer on that, but I'll leave it there for now. And next, I'm going to adjust the release time. Now, this particular plugin has two release time. It has the release peak time, which relates to transients which sort of quickly go over the threshold. They're there for a moment. It detects that, and then it just allows you to adjust the release time for those kind of transients. And then there is the release RMS time. This is when the signal's gone over the threshold in a more sustained way, and you want to adjust the release time for that. Now, again, this really depends on the sort of feel of the song, and again, how much of those transients you want to come through from the drums and really stand out. So I'm just going to adjust those two now.
Ever felt so far away from you?
Okay, that feels about right for me at the moment. So with those basic settings set, I'm then going to adjust that threshold again so that I'm just doing around about 1 to 2 decibels of volume reduction. So I'll just adjust that.
Ever felt so far away from you?
Okay, and that's fine. It's very, very subtle, and if I switch it off and on, you'll probably hardly hear much difference at all. It's just allowing me just a little bit more headroom and controlling those peaks there in that louder section.
Ever felt so far away from you?
Now, one thing I will say about compression for mastering, you don't want to be thinking about using it to control the differences between the quiet and the loud sections of your song. So say, for example, in a song like this where it starts off with just the piano and the vocal, and lots of it's fairly quiet, and then there's a much louder section in the middle. I don't really feel that compressors are the tool of choice for that. Instead, I would rather use my volume automation for that, and we'll be tackling that a little bit later.
7.
So the next thing I'm going to do is a little bit of stereo widening. Now, I've already got a plugin loaded up here, the Ozone Imager plugin, which I've already inserted into that effects chain, which we created down there a moment ago. This is a free plugin, guys. There'll be a link in the description down below. And it's got some very simple controls. I'm only going to be using this one here, which is the width control. If we have it all the way down to the bottom, the song sounds pretty much mono, neutral in the middle, and then we can just add a little bit of width as we go along. So I'm going to play the song and add a little bit of width until I'm happy with it.
Ever felt so far away from you?
Okay, I like it there. It's as simple as that, a no-brainer. Now, there is a commercial version of this which I actually use mostly when I'm doing actual masters, and that enables you to do widening based on frequency ranges, because I tend to like to keep, especially the bass, the lower end frequencies, completely intact. I like them to be centered, so that's an option if you want to pay. But if you just want a free plugin to do some stereo widening, I think this one's awesome.
8.
So now I'm going to do my final EQing, and I would be normally using my reference track quite a lot here to see how it compares to what I've got so far and what I want to add or take away from the different frequencies using the EQ plugin. I won't be doing that. I'll just be demonstrating quickly here. And I'm using this plugin here, which is from Tokyo Dawn Records, called Nova. It's a free EQ, and there'll be a link in the description down below. I just slightly prefer it over the built-in EQ plugins that you do get with Cakewalk. Now, I'm first of all going to listen out for the bass end of things. I'm going to go down to this bottom band here, and I'm going to isolate that band. I'm just going to adjust the Q a little bit. It actually looks okay. And I'm just going to listen out for anything which is a little bit overwhelming in that bottom end. Now, I must say on this point, it's often useful to use something like a subwoofer if you're going to listen to this, because even my 8-inch Rocket speakers here don't always reveal some really unwanted frequencies down in the bottom end. But you can hear those frequencies on some really common stereo equipment such as Bose equipment or even those Beats headphones that everyone loves to use. They're very bass heavy, and I've often found my mixers and the bass end aren't translating well to those. So I try and pinpoint some overwhelming frequencies there so that they're not too much on that equipment. So I'll have a listen to the song isolating that band, and it's right there where I've got it there around about the 50 hertz. There's a bit of a boom there. Now I'm doing this by eye and a little bit by my ear in my headphones. Normally, as I say, I'd use a subwoofer for this just to check out these low frequencies. I probably would be bringing it down, 2 or 3 decibels at the most, with a fairly narrow Q actually, so I'm not affecting those slightly higher frequencies up there. Now, the other thing I'm often doing is adding a little bit of sparkle on the top end. I'll usually use a high band up here, and I'll set it to, what it's set to here, which is a sort of a shelf setting. You can see it if I move it up and down. And I would just sort of add a little bit of sparkle. So I'm going to listen to the whole song here and just gradually add that in.
Ever felt so far away from you?
And again, I'd be comparing that to my reference to see how that compares. A word of caution on there, if you're an older chap like me or an older lady like me, hang on, that's wrong. Well, anyway, your ears are not so good on the top end. You lose a bit of top end hearing as you get older. So you can tend to overcompensate with this. So just be a little bit careful with that.
9.
So the next thing I'd be looking at here is automation. Now, if you don't know how to do automation in Cakewalk, then do check out my video about that. I'll put a link in the description down below for that. I'm not actually going to do any automation here at the moment. I'll just have a quick chat about what I'd be thinking about automating. Now, I did allude to it earlier. I would think about automating the quieter and the louder sections of the song. Sometimes there can just be too much disparity. And what happens is you find that when you actually listen to the song away from the studio, that you always want to kind of turn it up at the beginning, but then the middle section kicks in and it's too loud. So sometimes you just want to, that's good to have dynamic range, but sometimes you just want to close that gap a little bit. So in that case, what I would look at doing is just sort of lifting those quieter sections up a little bit with volume automation. Now, it doesn't need to stop at volume automation. There's other things that we've done during this process. Namely, I would suggest that the stereo widening is something you could automate. So I would tend to think about automating, making it much wider during the bigger sections of the song, during the chorus or during the big section of this song where there's a big long instrumental. That's a really nice time to add it wider. And then when you come back to your sort of verses, it has a really nice effect of sort of closing back in and being more centered. So that's another thing that you could automate as well. Even saturation could be something that you could automate in the same way. So do use automation. Make sure, of course, if you use it for the volume automation, that it is subtle and it's not obvious that you've kind of just turned it up and down. So as with everything in mastering, subtle moves is the answer.
10.
So now we get to the part that everyone really cares about, and that is how loud their track can be made so it competes with other tracks that it will be played against. Now, mostly in this day and age, we'll be releasing to streaming services such as Spotify, and they give some guidelines in terms of the kind of levels that you should be trying to achieve for their services. It can be a bit different for things like CD, MP3, that kind of thing, and I'll discuss that a little bit later, but mostly we're going to look at cases such as Spotify. Now, Spotify give guidance in terms of peak level and average level. Now, peak level is expressed in terms of true peak. Now, true peak is a way of describing the peak level, accounting for the fact that when we're converting for digital to audio, there can be a bit of a margin of error. So what can happen is, although you set your song to be at a peak of 0 dB in your DAW, when it gets converted out to analog, there can be some error depending on the converters used, and you can end up with sort of distortion which you don't want. So true peak sort of tries to compensate for that. And not only that, but they actually give you a margin of error within Spotify itself to set it a little bit lower so that they can adjust it themselves after you've uploaded it. Now, the other thing is the actual average level. This is normally expressed these days in LUFS, which is a way of looking at the average level of music kind of over time, which is a little bit better than just looking at a snapshot here and there. So what we're going to do here in Cakewalk is look at our span analyzer here. I'm just going to change the metering here from dBFS to LUFS ML, medium length LUFS. So we've got that all set up and ready to go, and it's set to true peak for the peak metering. Now I'm using a plugin to control the loudness, and this plugin is a well-known one called Loudness. Lots of people seem to prefer this one. It's a free plugin, and I'll put a link to it down in the description below. Not lots of controls here. Basically a control at the top here to control the actual loudness, and another one at the bottom here to control the peak level. So we're going to start off with the peak level. I'm just going to roll it down so it goes down to -1 dB, which is that recommended peak level that Spotify suggests. I'm also going to click this ISP button here. That makes it a little bit more accurate when it's doing it. And the next thing I'm going to do is actually start to play my song, and I'm going to be looking at the metering down here, and it's going to show me the LUFS value there. As I play, I'm going to try and adjust this threshold so it gets as close as I can to around about -14.
So far away from you. You never really say what you see in me, but you say the right words for the things you need. That's what you do. I hang on every call, every word you say.
So a couple of things on this. You don't need to be ever so precise because it is going to be adjusted on the site after you upload it. You could actually push it quite a lot harder than the suggested value. All they're going to do is, you're not going to be louder than other songs if you do that. They're just going to push it back down. But you may get a kind of a sound that you like if you do that. So, you know, you can be a little bit flexible with this. You don't have to be too precise. Now, when you're going for something like CD, you can afford to really push it much, much more. Bear in mind, if you do this, you can end up with some fairly awful kind of pumping sounds. So, you know, don't try and just make it as loud as possible. Remember to keep dynamics in your music. It's that sort of difference between loud and soft sometimes, which really expresses some emotion. That's my opinion on it in any case. So it's really as simple as that in terms of getting your loudness to the kind of level you want it. You will notice here as well that when I adjust this threshold here and make it louder, there's nothing I can do to make it go over that true peak value. It went to -1 there, and it's just not going up above it there. So you can really afford to push it around on that threshold. So do try to remember, you don't have to stick to these 10 steps rigidly. I'm merely suggesting them as a starting point to get you going, and then you can change them as you get more experience. My process has changed a lot over the years and continues to evolve to this day. Now in a moment I'd like to tell you about a new Cakewalk community that I've been taking part in, but before we get to that, if you did like this video, make sure you hit the like button. If you didn't like this video, hit the dislike button twice. If you've got any questions whatsoever, ask in the comments down below. I'll do my very best to answer them for you. Now if you do like this kind of content, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell on YouTube so that you get notified about my future videos. So guys, I just want to quickly mention a new Cakewalk chat group which I've joined. I was put onto it by one of our viewers. I hope I get his name right. It's Raleigh Rikes. I'm sorry if I got that wrong. But it's on a platform called Discord. I didn't know anything about it until a couple of weeks ago. So there's a new community there where they chat about Cakewalk. I found it really fun. I try and get in there every day. It's a great place to get help or to help other people out. So I encourage you to join it. I'll put a link in the description. You can go there in your browser. You can also download an app for your phone and use it there as well. So if you go in there and you join up, make sure you say Mike sent you.